Hello, welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about villains. Before we do that, Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we like to talk about games, and this episode, which I just wrote villains in the announcement. I just called this villains. This episode is something that's been brewing in my mind on the tabletop side of things. For a couple of reasons that are close to what I don't know, we talked about this recently on the podcast, basically. So in the most recent game that we played together, it's called Heretic Heroes, right? We just finished that arc on not this Monday, I guess it was last Monday, right?
Yeah, because this Monday we played Commander. It was the Monday before.
Because this Monday we did play Commander, and it was pretty stupid. We'll talk about that in the back half, okay? So we finished that arc. It ended with a big boss battle. There was sort of a villain reveal as sort of a part of all of this kind of stuff. I had been working on that for a long time. I'd been thinking about it for a long time. And a couple of weeks beforehand, I also did another D&D arc. That was the first arc of Heretic Heroes of 7th Expedition concluded. And it also concluded with a very different sort of kind of like villainous set of circumstances. And in the process of just doing all of this and putting all of this together, I was talking about and consuming and, listening to podcasts and listening to YouTube videos and just learning as much as I could about kind of like the way that people think about and conceive of villainy and all of the rest of it. And it put me in this position where now I guess I have to fucking kind of like podcast about it. The place I want to start actually is a question. What do you think the best villains in like your D&D sort of experience have sort of been?
Barzillai, as played by you.
Yeah, from Hell's Rebels, sure, yeah.
Let me think about this, because a lot of the adventure paths kind of have like, they don't have like strong villains across the whole game. Weirdly, one of my favorite games is a game that Chris wrote. The person we thought was a villain the whole time was just like not. He's just like, it's one of those things where like he was his organization had like an element that had gone rogue, and we assumed that he was in control of it the whole time. We saw him very early in the campaign. He was always kind of in the background, or his organization was involved. We were like, oh, this must be like the guy, right? And we eventually like meet with him. It's like, no, he's just, he is a dude with good intentions. That part of his organization got out from under him, but ultimately he is pushing us to like, he's pushing towards the same kind of goals that we were doing, in like a zero villainous way. The other villains were like dragons, which were fun, but like didn't have a huge impact. I think it's got to be. I think it's got to be Barzillai.
Okay,
as like a strong central villain. I don't think I played a ton of games with like strong central villains.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot because I don't know that I can think of good sort of like villains. Like I think of villains as being a very important kind of part and concept of tabletop RPGs, right? In the sense that you want to kind of create characters that build up over time and that players can have real sort of narrative kind of dramatic chops for, right? But also at the same time, when I think about my own kind of like tabletop experience, I don't think of great, I can think of a lot of good moments, but I can't think of too many like great sort of villains, right? And I've been thinking about this kind of concept a lot, because even just the nature of what makes a villain is kind of a tough sort of question to answer. It's sort of like a philosophical, like another, I wrote this in the announcement. Another thing to think about is like, when does an antagonist become a villain, right? Like when do you become a villain after, or versus just being an antagonist? So for instance, in the first arc of Hell's Rebels, you guys were fighting against Tonrik, who was the first two books actually of Hell's Rebels. You guys were fighting against Tonrik. But I wouldn't think of Tonrik as a villain. He was an antagonist, and he was an antagonist that died and you resurrected in order to kind of use him politically, and then he would be a staunch ally for the rest of that kind of campaign, right? But Barzillai kind of did the same exact thing, but I would think of him as a villain, right? Even when he becomes on side, he's no longer the antagonist, but he still is a villain in that story. Do you know what I mean? And I was just thinking about kind of like the nature of this, and I don't even know that I could find a good definition. I could find like a good sort of definition for it. But in my travels, the thing that I learned, I guess I would say sort of most, is that there is sort of a spectrum to villainy. This would probably be somewhere along the thesis for how I've come to think about villains. Villains have a spectrum of maybe what I would call like naturalistic villains. Really, this like describes like force of nature villains, right? And then on the other end, you would maybe have humanist villains, right? Where the axis is just defined by how much of a real kind of relatable character is underneath there versus something that is kind of unrelatable sort of fundamentally. So on one end, you might consider a villain like, like Doc Ock from Spider-Man 2 is the first one that jumps into my brain, right? Like a tragic villain who you have a lot of sympathy for and you understand why they do the thing. Even somebody like Thanos maybe would be an okay version of this. Or like Magneto is maybe the best kind of archetypical version of this. Versus someone like Sauron, kind of on the far side of villainy, who is just, why does Sauron do what he does? Who cares? He's fundamentally
he is a being of evil, right? Like
exactly.
He's evil incarnate, which is, goes a lot with like Tolkien's kind of religious beliefs and whatnot. Like it's like an embodiment of evil.
Yeah, and in the context of these D&D games that just wrapped, I had the Beastmen, for whom there really isn't even kind of a named villain. There's a little bit of one. The final villain for 7th Expedition were two Beastmen captains that they had fought before. One was Morgur the Shadowgave, which was sort of like a sentient disease. Once you kill him, he respawns. Kind of, he takes over another Beastman as his host body.
Assuming and he's like all direct control.
Exactly, it is. It is actually pretty much exactly that, right? And then the other one is Eurus, who obviously you fought on Monday, 2 Mondays ago. Eurus is the false prophet, who was the catalyst in control of his brother Terej's power at sort of the beacon. And I think of them as being on opposite ends of this spectrum. The Beastmen, fundamentally unknowable, right? They are a true primal force of nature that is really no different than sort of personified typhus, or personified smallpox or something. Right.
They're not evil per se. They're just kind of like natural forces acting in opposition to you.
Yeah, they are typed evil, interestingly enough, on the alignment scale, and they are typed as chaotic evil just because when you make a creature, you have to give it an alignment kind of thing. But I think I would probably agree with something kind of along those lines. They are almost they are a disease that wants to spread and consume and do, whatever weird stuff with their herd stones that corrupts nature all around them. And whatever motivates them to that purpose is just like, they don't have a tragic backstory, They are just they are compelled by instinct, and I don't know, a need to, I don't know, whatever, all of that kind of stuff. And on the opposite end, you have Eurus, who is typed lawful good, right? Eurus is a villain, and he is both an antagonist, but he is kind of, I think I'm stretching it a little bit, to be honest with you, with that lawful good. He is theoretically supposed to think of himself as lawful good, and he is engaging with the world in a lawful good way, just doing it in a pretty typical sort of greater good, truth is an affront to my designs, and I need to withhold the truth from you in order to preserve the order and unification and all of that other kind of stuff.
Sure. But that's just, I feel like this kind of highlights some of the weaknesses with the kind of traditional alignment system, because no one very few people think of themselves as villains, right? Especially people of like large importance and prominence. right? And so I guess that kind of typifies, kind of real life a little bit more.
Yeah, and that was definitely a part of how I was thinking about it when it came to yours. It's funny because I was telling Rachel this. Eurus had a whole speech that I had planned. I had actually kind of rehearsed this about 1,000 times. And then Rachel, in the moment, did that thing where she spent the hero point in order to pull Terej into her mind. And it just completely threw a wrench into everything, right? Because part of what underlies sort of like Eurus as a villain is that he is not, he's like an end boss to this dungeon, but he's not used to just killing people. Like, he uses the term pilgrim because people made pilgrimages to him, essentially. And this is how he attained powers like the Catalyst, right? Like, he became the Catalyst after whatever. And that was because a group of people made it to the center of the beacon where he was, and he was able to work with them in order to do sort of, whatever else, all that kind of stuff, right? It's that you guys posed a real threat to his power, that in the same way that if you were lawful good, and you were fighting against somebody who was threatening your ability to, I don't know, feed the poor or something like that, you would kill them and exercise like lethal force. Like, in my mind, that is the exact sort of same kind of operating psychology for sort of Eurus. But the fact that Eurus had that psychology and the Beastmen don't is really what I think kind of determines this scale that I'm sort of thinking about. Which in a certain sense sounds a little bit like your dragons from Chris's game.
Yeah, so this is interesting though, right? Because like Sauron, and so Sauron is kind of like evil for evil's sake, right? Like, he wants to do bad things because he's a bad dude that does bad things, right? These are harder to portray realistically. They're mostly kind of like high fantasy villains, right? Like, that are like people who are crazy, right? Like, maybe the Joker is this way. He does stuff because he's like sick. Most kind of traditional motivated villains are kind of greedy, right? Like, they're like, willing to, they're self-interested to the point where they're willing to like do morally corrupt things to others to get ahead. Whereas the Beastmen, as you're talking about them, are kind of like more force of nature, which is, I think, is maybe a flat spectrum isn't the best way to do this, because I see a real difference between things that, by acting according to their nature, are threats, right? This is like the Twister in Twister, right? Like the tornado in Twisters, right? Like, the tornado is not evil. It does not hate the people on the ground. It does not hate houses, right? It just, by its nature, causes damage. Same thing about like a disease, like a true disease, right?
The contagion in Contagion.
Sure, right? And I think that's different than a tragic villain is different than a bad, like a poor, like a villain with bad motivations. Maybe that's the wrong way to put this, but like, like someone like Doc Ock kind of didn't mean to be a villain, and the arms got into his brain, right? That's part of the tragedy there, is that he didn't mean to do any of this thing. I think that's the way most tragic villains shake out, right? Like, they are victims of their station in one way or another, with various amounts of like responsibility for their own actions. Whereas like, poorly motivated villains are like ones that have like, this is kind of like you're just like me type villains, right? Like, people with motivations but without the self-control to stop them from going too far. That's kind of the model you see a lot of, actually the villain is a dark reflection of the hero type things. And then on the Sauron end of things, it's like villains that are motivated by being evil, which are like I said, more kind of high fantasy type tropes.
Yeah, this is interesting to me because I think the sort of straightforward understanding of a villain, like if I think about kids media and the kinds of villains that I grew up with, like as a kid, they were very straightforward. Mostly this is sort of self-interested. It's like Crooks. It is the Riddler who commits crimes, but he has a compulsion to leave riddles for Batman to solve, to help Batman because he has a guilt complex or whatever, and he's fucking crazy. Do you know what I mean? Like, Riddler is not there because he wants to hurt anybody. He just wants to rob the bank.
He wants
the
money,
Batman,
right?
Yeah, exactly. In like the Batman 60s cartoon is kind of like the reference point I'm sort of making here. Versus, you know, maybe the Joker is an okay example of this. The Joker is who I want to go to here, but I do sort of think that the Joker is a little bit of a force of nature. The Joker is maybe the best evidence I would be able to provide that there is a spectrum between, on one end, the Riddler, and on the other end, Sauron, right? The Joker is not Sauron, because Sauron isn't really even a character, right? Like, part of the reason that the Twister and Twister isn't evil is because it doesn't even have kind of motivation or a conceivable, like, mental state. The Joker also doesn't have a very relatable mental state, but I can conceive of the Joker's mental state.
Sure.
It is to fuck with Batman, right? In increasingly disastrous, sadistic ways, right? Which I would think of as like villainy, but I don't relate to that. I don't find that sympathetic. I don't think that I don't even think that the Joker thinks of himself as sort of like,
this is also maybe gets into this Three Jokers thing we were talking about a week or two ago, right? Yeah, because
true.
Like, so maybe that's, but I see what you're getting at, right? Like serial killer maybe is the kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. This is part of what I'm thinking. Like Hannibal Lecter, Buffalo Bill are sort of like in this vein of villainy, because they are motivated. Maybe I would say kind of by kind of compulsion is how I would want to phrase that. Like being motivated by their compulsion to kill, or to do evil, right? It's not just that they kill; it is that they murder, right? And murder has the connotation of an unjust killing, right? But that's different than like the Shocker who just robs banks in New York and Spider-Man beats him up, you know?
Sure. Yeah. So what is the distinction you're trying to draw here then?
I'm trying to defend my spectrum. I'm trying to say that I do think it's a spectrum between this sort of natural on one end, human on kind of the other, and that you can have things that are close. So, for instance, one of the things that I think makes the Twister example interesting is the fact that the Twister is not personified in any way. You can't, to put this in D&D terms, you cannot punch the Twister, right?
Sure.
You can never go to like the Twister and beat it up. And also the Twister can never punch you. It can kill you. It can kill you in a myriad different sort of ways, right? But there is no personification there, right? Whereas with the Beastmen, I feel like it just does make it materially different that the Beastmen themselves can do these things, even if their motivations are kind of unknowable and inscrutable.
Well, how would you handle a bear then, right? Like a bear that, you know, attacks you, right? Like,
I think you absolutely could handle that. This is part of the spectrum, right? I think a bear is one step closer to the middle. The shark in Jaws, right, is one step. It is still a force of nature, but it's one step closer to human on the nature to human sort of scale, because it is, I don't know, it is a thing with motivation, and its motivation is to eat shit.
Sure,
you know what I mean?
Right, but like that's maybe I'm not fully grokking what your kind of distinguishing factor is here, because like you don't blame the shark for wanting to eat things. That's its nature, right? Like it doesn't have a concept of morality, right?
That's interesting. Because I guess that's fair. I guess part of it is that I think Sauron can be a villain that is one step back from Jaws, because I don't even think Sauron has something that is sort of like, in a certain sense, you can kind of justify Jaws because it is a shark and sharks eat things. And there are a lot of people in Amity Bay or whatever it is in Jaws. Sure.
And when you say one step back, because I think Sauron is pretty, he's not exactly human, because this is the problem with like things that are motivated to be evil for evil's sake, right? Like but like I think he's infinitely more morally culpable than the shark in Jaws, right?
Oh man, I guess that's kind of interesting. I guess I'm sort of suggesting that maybe in a weird way he's kind of not. How morally culpable is like Satan?
Very,
You know what I mean?
Well, extremely, right? And
Yeah.
Satan and
In Paradise Lost is different than Satan in.
I would say Satan and Sauron kind of have the same type of thing. They're both like
Sure.
fallen angels, effectively, right? Like
Yeah.
Satan, but Satan is entirely responsible for his lie, at least by like standard mainline Christian theology, right? Like, he's entirely morally culpable for the things he does. There is, I think there are some interpretations that like place him as kind of like the necessary antagonist, right? Like the thing that has to exist opposite God, but that's not the typical conceptualization of him. Is my understanding.
Yeah, part of me is thinking. I mean, I read Paradise Lost about a bazillion years ago, so I can't even think about what that was. What was I thinking when I read Paradise Lost? But part of me is thinking about that nature of things. So, for instance, what about gods? Okay, so in typical D&D terms, you have Asmodeus, who is the lawful evil archfiend of the devils or whatever, right? Is he morally culpable? He's the most one-to-one Satan I can probably think of in a tabletop sense, right? But also, he is like manifest evil, right?
So I think the stronger argument would actually be for one of the fiends, because they're kind of like, I think Asmodeus has specific kind of like, was like, fell type stuff. Like most of the gods, most of the evil gods do a thing where they become evil, right? Like they were not.
Oh, really?
At least in my,
I guess I don't know this lore.
In my recollection of things, most of them, especially the the lawful evil ones, I'm pretty sure this is true in Pathfinder and Galarian as well, is they are kind of like, they did a bad thing in heaven and now they're bad. Maybe the better example would be like Rovagug, who I think he's like the chaotic evil one. I think he's just kind of like,
yeah, he's just like the chaos beetle that wants to destroy the whole world.
He
right?
just wants to eat everything, right? Or like
it's like Jaws. I said that's like Jaws.
Yeah, no, part of the problem with kind of alignment as like a system is that it's very hard to account for a being who is motivated to do evil for evil's sake, right? Like that's not like a realistic, or that's like a like evil entities are morally culpable because definitionally they are, right? Like that is part of tagging them as evil, right? Like they have to be, otherwise the
capable. You cannot tag something as evil unless it is fundamentally morally culpable,
right? And I think what that implies is kind of like a deistic, this is getting into moral philosophy shit, right? Like this is kind of like a deontologically, right? Like there is something that has to set what is good and evil, and they are defined as being the opposite of good, right? Like in kind of modern terms is very morally relativistic, right? And so it's very hard, like no one thinks they're a villain, right? Like, to go to an old sawhorse, right? Like Hitler didn't think he was a villain, right? Like, history has decided he was, and by many morality systems he is, but he was not motivated by like wanting to be evil. He was doing the things.
Like I see what you're saying. No person's sort of self-conception would include, it's not that like cruelty for the sake of cruelty is not it. It's always a byproduct. Magneto is willing to kill people because he believes he's fighting for the liberation of his people, right? And that as a freedom fighter against oppressors, he is justified in these things, right?
Yeah.
Someone like, I guess I don't want to make a Hitler argument because that's kind of fucked up.
No, but like,
but like it is. But I totally understand what you're saying, right? That even the most heinous villains have some sort of system by which they can describe themselves as the aggrieved party who is deserving of using what we would otherwise consider unjustified means, right? Norman Osborn is so consumed with his own self-delusions of grandeur that he sees everyone around him as failing him, and therefore he is going to murder them because they have failed him personally in his own quest to become whoever he wants to be, right? This is the self-conception that he has that justifies murder, right?
Sure. And even characters that are cruel for cruelty's sake, because those characters do exist. They are, if you were to get into their minds, like they would say, I'm doing it because it feels good and I just don't care about the consequences. Like the only types of characters that do things because they are affirmatively evil are things like demons, or like things that kind of occupy that narrative space, things that are defined as evil by kind of like, Sauron fits here, Satan fits here, demons fit here, right? Which is hard. It's what makes it hard to like humanize them, because they are like molded to be evil in a way that, like, if you think about it with kind of modern day moral precepts, it seems kind of unfair to them, right? Like they're morally culpable isn't the right word. They are evil incarnate, right? And that is their role, and that is what they are. And they must be opposed, but like that doesn't, I don't know how it's almost like, like demons are maybe almost outside of moral culpability, like demons and devils, because they are like avatars of evil in that way, right? Like, I don't know.
It's funny because I tried to, in my campaign setting, I wanted to dodge all of this, right? By just saying these things kind of don't exist, but they can bestow power on mortals, and mortals are the one who choose good and evil for themselves, right? So, for instance, Ellenweth, right? Ellenweth is conceived of, when it comes to sort of Eurus, as a lawful, good sort of god, right? But you could also conceive of a version of Ellenweth that is chaotic good by focusing on the aspects of her, scripture that are about sort of a radical embrace of truth, at the expense of all other things. Basically, the thing that was happening in the Lanian hierarchy was Eurus said that essentially law is more important than good in this instance. Unification is really what he was going for, right? Is more important than truth, and therefore I am willing to lie and deceive people in order to create the unity that is the good in Ellenweth. This is the good in his sort of like lawful good. The order. Like his framework for exactly. But you could also see a version of things where someone who is chaotic good thinks of themselves oriented in the opposite way, where they want to tear down sort of unjust systems of whatever, because the thing that matters most is truth, and any institution has some level of policing of the truth, right? You can't have an institution. You can make like a hardcore anarchist argument that would be something along the lines of all institutions are in opposition to truth, and they create definitions of truth that are wrong, and I will tear them down in the name of sort of like Ellenweth, something kind of along those lines. And in that way, I'm sorry, do you want to fight me on that point?
No, I don't, because the thing that popped into my head is like a follower of Ellenweth who's very interested in like the crime rates of different species.
Fair, true, right? But there's also another version of this where you could get a lawful evil Ellenweth, right? An Ellenweth whose pursuit of unification becomes xenophobic or genocidal, even, right?
Sure.
You would say, you could easily do this. Obviously, the Lanian hierarchy is not this, because my whole point is I wanted to make a group of villains who are lawful good, right? But the version of things where you go, the unity, the community, community is one of the tenets of Ellenweth, right? It needs to be protected from the filth of orcs or something like that. And that you would probably justify some level of genocidal regime under Ellenweth's light, which would be
lawful society.
Ellenweth society?
Like is one of her, like, who is this society? The god of like civilization.
Gandaris is the god of civilization,
okay.
But he's like the god of like monuments kind of civilization. Ellenweth is the god of like church, like you go to church,
okay,
and you're part of a community there.
Sure, like you could make those communities very insular, and like I'm just kind of playing off what you're saying, right? Like because like the god of civilization, you get a lot of kind of like beat back these savages type of deal, right? Like,
yeah. Oh, exactly. Like a lawful evil version of Gandaris, who is like the god of, you know, civilization, would be like, we have to protect ourselves, our sophisticated civilized ways from the barbarian hordes, in the same way that like a Roman historian or something would probably make or like Tacitus probably made an argument like that or something like that. Right. I think that's very kind of part and parcel with this. And in my mind, this is like kind of core to how I want to use like evil and good. In a certain sense, lawful good and lawful evil are sort of fundamentally relative frameworks in my mind, because not all lawful evil characters are lawful evil along the same sort of dimensions. It's just that it kind of categorizes a group of people who combine, you know, orderliness and injustice, I guess is kind of what I want to say. But you could do that in a number of different ways. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you can get tyranny. It represents tyranny, right? You can get that in a couple of different ways, is I guess kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So, do you want to talk about Eurus? Because at some point you had said something about like a villain that was just kind of like straight evil, without kind of like complicating factors, which is what I thought most of this conversation was going to be about. So I'm.
Eurus is complicated. In what way?
I had thought that you had said this at some point, right? That you had said that like Eurus was supposed to be kind of like someone who was evil with that, or like someone who was like a bad villain that you didn't like that didn't have like a tragic backstory, that didn't have like a point, right? Like, and maybe I misunderstood you, but that kind of drove some of my understanding.
Oh yeah,
of
it's
things.
complicated. I mean, Eurus does sort of have a tragic backstory in the sense that, you know, obviously this is all kind of implication, but he is the brother of a prophet who has immense, like truly insane amounts of sort of power, and there's a real amount of sort of jealousy there. And when somebody, I mean, I think of, in a certain sense,
that's not tragic, right? Like that's just kind of like he's.
Oh, that's fair. It is not a tragic back. This is not me saying it's a tragic backstory, but he does have like a motivation in that sense,
sure.
Right? Eurus is not. I mean, Eurus is kind of complicated because he does authentically believe in the greater good. This is something that was like core to how I was conceiving of this character. He wants to build the strongest possible empire because he has been, as he said, to the other side of the partition. He knows what awaits, whatever that is, and he believes that a deeply unified Leonin hierarchy that devotes itself to one god instead of spreading itself among 8 is like the way to do this, and he is going to break the back of the empire and convert all of the heathens there to this same faith, or kill them, probably something. I mean, who knows, right? In that framework, he is fundamentally kind of being selfless, right? And also the sacrifice that he gives, which is to live as this sort of arch revenant for 3,000 years at the center of the beacon, channeling the power of his brother and all of the rest of that kind of stuff, is also like a real sort of, that's like a real self-sacrifice to the situation. But he is fundamentally pretty motivated by jealousy that his brother is essentially a god made manifest on the plane of the earth, and he never had access to that kind of power, and now he does. But in my mind, that's like confirmation bias, right? These are the things that you tell yourself when you're sort of subconsciously engaging in evil. Do you know what I mean? I feel like people do this kind of motivated reasoning all the time for themselves. Yeah,
for everything, right? Like, yeah.
And that happened to come out because in the battle, Rachel, channeled Terej, who was his brother, in order to, I guess not, I don't really know what, in order to do, I don't know, just to see what would happen.
Because it seemed like the cool thing to do, right? It made sense to me, right? Like that.
It definitely did make sense, and it did set Eurus off, right? Which is exactly what I wanted to. It's always funny when I do these sort of like NPCs arguing with one another kinds of things, but that's exactly how he would have felt in the moment because it was sick. You know what? That's a good answer. Okay, because it was like fucking cool, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the Beastmen are the opposite of this. The Beastmen are evil in like a kind of in this sentient kind of disease way, and they're also doing things that I think of as horrific, right? One of the things that the Beastmen do, as the party learned, is they will just pull people and turn them. They will like forcibly mutate people into these monstrosities, right? There's a whole thing where they came across this like pit, and there were 3 people who were essentially going to be dipped in this pit and amalgamated into something called a Cygor, right? Like a big gigantic cyclops kind of thing. And that is just like, that's like a horrific fucked up thing to do.
Sure.
Obviously they are doing it for reasons that are sort of inscrutable, right? You can infer that Eurus is motivated partially by the fact that his brother sacrificed himself for honestly for him, right? And he was willing to take advantage of that sacrifice to wield the power that he never had. But the Beastmen, they don't have anything like that. They're just doing this because they want to make herdstones, and whatever those herdstones do, who knows, right? But it is interesting to me that like Eurus, I feel like, is a villain who will probably be a little bit more like Bars Lythrune for people than the villain than Morgar the Shadow gave, right? I kind of get the sense that like it is harder to do this sort of force of nature villain the same level of justice, I guess I would kind of say, that a true villain in a D&D game gets. Or not a true villain, a naturalistic villain. Or I'm sorry, a humanistic villain.
Well, I mean, you think it's harder to do it. I think it's actually harder to do like a humanized villain well, just because it involves, I think, for like somewhat mechanical reasons, right? Like in order for a villain that you really kind of engage with, right? Like part of what we did with Eurus is like, everything was kind of based on inference and discovery. And so like a lot of it boils down to, Eurus was jealous and he's kind of a dickhead, right? Like, and understanding the full kind of breadth of what's happening is hard to get, kind of in the arc that we did. I think it's hard to like build a truly well-defined humanistic villain that kind of like gives you these kinds of like, it kind of like hits this balance well, because you need like things like you need repeated encounters. And
why wouldn't you just kill him is often the answer.
I was gonna say that is part of it, right? Like mechanically, you have to face the villain in a situation where one of you can't just easily kill the other, right?
Yeah,
right. Because like theoretically, if Eurus is a high level threat, right? Like let's presume this was like a multi-year campaign and we were fighting it at level 16 instead of at level 4, right? In order to establish him properly as a villain, we probably have to interact with him at an earlier point. And it'd have to be a situation where he just doesn't like look at us and like, crush us, like, instantaneously. And that's doable, right? Like you can have him project himself, right? Like, or something like that. But that's why I think this is why a lot of kind of like game stuff does like the kind of villain that you fight. Like there's the man in the chair and the man behind the, or not the man in the chair. That's the wrong thing. But like, there's the villain and there's the man, like there's the force behind the villain. This is very typical of like a JRPG, right? Like there's like the evil king and then like the god of chaos, which is a true final boss or whatever. Right. I think that's because the evil king is someone that you can make more of like a real, like a villain that you can put some real, like personality into. But he doesn't end up being like the real threat, which happens to be like, this kind of like crazy force of nature that sits behind it.
Yeah. And I also think about how like, something that we were talking about in another context is the nature of dramatic irony for like a D&D game is pretty complicated, right? In Avengers Infinity War, when the storytellers want to explain to you Thanos' motivation, they just cut to a flashback. Right. But you can't do that as easily in a D&D game. It's like it either has to exist in part of someone's backstory. Right. I guess there was a version of that happened in Heretic Heroes in the sense that Heretic Heroes was a game about research. It was a game about learning the secrets that you were prevented from knowing and coming to an understanding of the nature of the falsehoods that have been edited out of the record over sort of like the years or whatever. But I just think about how easy and simple it is to just write a chapter in a novel from the perspective of the villain. In order like, I can read Game of Thrones, and Cersei is a POV character who will explain to you her fucked up thought process, right? She absolutely a villain, absolutely an antagonist, all the rest of that kind of stuff. But like, you get into her head so much easier than you can in a tabletop game, which I do think it's like a real sort of troublesome piece. There are interesting options though. Like, one of the things that I really liked about this game for Shajarok is, having the ability to interact with the dream state, right? Like, being able to go and see Shajarok has this brother who is a paladin in the Ordo Primus, and so he's obviously a bad guy, obviously a villain. Like, if you guys go to Kovolgrad, you know that Joral is going to be a villain that you will be facing off against, and there is now a context for Joral that has been created in a way where the two of them couldn't kill one another, kind of thing. And I think that there are also just like a number of other, I don't know. Yeah, I guess we did this with Barzillai, right? Barzillai was giving big speeches where he was talking about who he was and what he was doing, and you guys were in the crowd watching him give these big speeches, but you were not in a position to go actually attack and kill him.
Yeah, or then you can like have diary, like, dear diary, today I murdered 4 children because it was cool, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
No, there are ways.
I also think, in a certain sense, I would maybe say that in 7th Expedition, the real villain was the White Deer, who I've explained a little bit about on this podcast before. As they all got plague cursed, which is sort of the underlying thing before the burning blood sort of disease, and they kept having these fucked up dreams about the White Deer. Like, that's another good way of, imparting a villain into a party's mind. You could imagine a version of things where in some other campaign or something, I don't think they're ever going to encounter the White Deer again in 7th Expedition for reasons that are not clear, but I won't elaborate on, I guess. But you can imagine the White Deer in a prolonged version of something is like, that could be the final boss of some other game somewhere else, right? And now we have done this setup work with with them getting plague cursed and getting these visions and all of the rest of it.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Do you feel like that's probably do you feel like that's like the reason that you have a hard time sort of identifying the strong villains from your tabletop games?
Why? Because there's just like not a lot of interactions with them.
Yeah, because it's just harder to, create the interactions with these characters in a tabletop gaming experience.
I think that's part of it. I also think that I think it's less to do with that and more like, so the villain in the what was it called? It was the Veldrana cycle, which was Chris's game, was that the planes were converging, and if no one did anything about it, the material plane was going to get fucked by the planes converging, right? Like the various forces were going to, and it was basically like running along to put together a coalition that would defend the plane and also like deal with kind of the malevolent forces on this plane and on the nearby planes that would have caused problems. And so that was really kind of a force of nature. That was like the actual villain, right? Like, there were individual forces that we had to deal with, but none of them were kind of like villain status. Except for
there wasn't like a cult that wanted the convergence of planes to take place or something like that, because it would.
Well, it was going to happen anyway, but that was kind of like this offshoot of the fourth circle. Actually, no, there was a very stand-up villain. Her name was Auntie Peggy. She was an elder fae that made all sorts of like terrible deals with us at various points of time. I cannot believe I did not mention Auntie Peggy, because she is like one of the players just like absolutely cannot stand her and just like wouldn't deal with her at all. Whereas like the rest would be like, sure, we'll give you a minute of our time, and then like cue to like middle of a fight. It's like Auntie Peggy takes a minute of her time. Give me your character sheet, right? Like she's controlling you for the next 60 seconds.
I do remember that story, because that's a great plot point. I love that. Yeah. Like I will make a deal for a minute of your time at my choosing, and it's just the most important minute, right?
Yeah. So there's and I think Auntie Peggy was a good example of it, because We met her really early on. We were obviously outclassed by her. She was a face. She wasn't interested in killing us outright. She was interested in kind of like using us for her own ends as far as she could, even though she knew that we were like she eventually like takes control of a goblin tribe in the region, right? And they're like, they're not like interested in like pushing back against her, but we're kind of like, well, you've got power that we could use, but at what cost, right? Like I think that worked really well. I think honestly, a big part of it is a lot of the games I've played have been adventure paths, and I think it's hard to write it when you've got 5 different books being written by multiple different people that, like, you know, aren't necessarily like they're being written simultaneously in many parts. I think it's just hard to put a coherent villain across them, right? Like theoretically, the villain in the game that in Season of Ghosts, which is the game that Mark is running, is the governor of this small town, but he's just kind of absent for most of it, and so he's like a bad guy, or it's like the god behind, or the malevolent force behind all of that. And they're bad, but they don't really like. They're always kind of far off, right? They're not like things you have personal relations with. In the same way that, like, you know, Sauron gets characterized a lot because of the Palantirs, right? But before that, he's just kind of like a force over there, right? Like the encroaching evil that you can't really deal with. There aren't a lot of like the hardest villain in Lord of the Rings is probably Saruman, right? Because you get to know him as a character. He's acting as an agent of deception. Him and maybe Grima Wormtongue, right? Like, you know, these are characters that you get to know. And maybe I don't think that makes Sauron not a villain. It just makes him a villain of it. Maybe I'm getting on board with your kind of like. I
think Saruman actually is a villain. I think he's a pretty perfect kind of archetype of a villain, especially the way, I mean, it's funny because in other conceptions of villainy that I've had on this podcast, I've sort of talked about how the thing that defines a hero is change, and the thing that defines a villain is stagnancy, right? You know, this is almost all, like Garrosh is a good example of this in World of Warcraft. Garrosh never repents, never admits he was wrong. He literally goes to oblivion in whatever the Sanctum of Domination when he's being tortured, because he just refuses. His final breath is telling Thrall to go fuck himself, right? Like, this to me is like a pretty good definition of sort of villainy, is that core sort of stubbornness. And that's like a structural villain. Like when I look at a story structure and kind of decipher who a villain is, almost always the character who refuses to change is going to be a villain, basically. Except ironically in like Captain America's stories, or like,
I would say like there's the inverse version of this, is like the person who doesn't change is the hero because he's willing to stand on principle, whereas
right.
like Saruman, right? Like Gandalf stays pure and Saruman caves to evil, right? Like he's the one who changes. So I don't think that always holds, but I see what you're saying. I think that dynamic is typically involved, right?
Yeah, this is me like describing like the sort of conventional, the most conventional story structure in the world, I think, is generally the hero fails and then changes and then succeeds, and the hero fails in comparison to the villain and then does something to change and become more powerful than the villain and then beats the villain. Like,
sure. Yeah.
This is Goku, this is Aladdin, this is like a million different characters who kind of go through that kind of core arc. But I would definitely agree that like it's funny, I guess Captain America is an interesting example. It's very rare, I think, I would find a villain who's like, there are some villains who are sort of like slippery, but do I think of a lot of villains who change? I guess not. I mean, like then they become like anti-heroes and stuff like that, right? Like you have somebody like the Punisher. Not even the Punisher. He's not a good example because he sort of stays principles. He's just fucked up in his principles. I don't know who's like a real redemption. Like Vegeta, I guess, redeems himself, right? He changes from a villain to a hero because of the love of a good woman named Bulma. It's like that kind of thing, right? Change is we typically associate change with good guys. Is really what it kind of comes down to, except for these like paragons like Captain America, Superman, whomever, who are deeply convicted in their beliefs, and they are, you know, hardcore Boy Scouts. When it comes to Man, I was going to bridge to something and I kind of forgot what I was going to get at. So I watched this video. I guess I'll talk about the video. So I watched this video. The video is called Why Most Modern Villains Are Boring. And it makes a very close point to the kind of point that I'm making now, but then goes off in a direction about postmodernism. So stop me if you've heard this one. We used to have villains who were just evil for evil's sake, who were just selfish, greedy, cruel, capricious, vindictive, malicious, contemptuous, all of the sort of, they had the character traits with which we associated to be evil. But now when we conceive of villains, we conceive of them with their tragic backstories. We give them motivations that are sympathetic, and we try and tell sort of their side of the story. This woman was very mad about this. She's very mad about this kind of conception of morality, this postmodern idea that sort of everybody has their own truth, if not necessarily, maybe their own validity would be a good sort of way to put it. It's not necessarily their own truth, right? Because like obviously there are facts and they
have their own motivations. Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. How do you feel about that side of things? Do you feel like this is something that we see too much of in current year?
I think it's cyclical, like everything. This is kind of, I think, maybe even very closely taxed to the kind of thing we've talked about of cynicism versus what's the other one we talk about?
Optimism?
Not optimism. Sincerity.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like, I think of sincere stories as having very kind of like, definitively evil villains, very cynical stories having more sympathetic villains.
That's actually so interesting and so fucking true, which is so strange because you would think that a very sincere story, like a very kind of emotionally driven sort of like melodrama, would sort of want to see the best in everybody and therefore would have the sympathetic portrayal of the villain, right? And a cynical story would want to see the worst in everybody and therefore have a very unrepentant, straightforward bad guy. But you're right. I do think the opposite is true.
Yeah, I don't think it's universal by any means, but like I do think that like part of the cynicism is that like the good guys aren't so good and the bad guys aren't so bad, and so everything's a lot more gray than you want to make it out to be.
Yeah. Oh God, that's so interesting. Yeah, it's funny because as soon as you said sincerity, my mind went to the most important movie of our generation, 1997's James Cameron's Titanic. And in Titanic, the most sincere melodrama I can possibly think of, which is part of what I love about it, right? Like Titanic is a movie where, I mean, the emotions are complex, but they are complex in a one-dimensional sort of way. It's a terrible way of framing it. The emotions of Titanic are complex, but they only happen through the lens of one character, right? You have Rose, who's a very emotionally complex woman, and then you have a bunch of sort of one-dimensional characters who sort of act as mirrors to help Rose see different sort of sides of herself and further her path of growth and change, right? And in that movie, two of those characters, the kind of core sort of villains of the story, are I don't even what the fuck is Billy Zane's character? Man, I love Titanic so much and I can't remember his fucking name. Cal. He's from Pittsburgh, which I should remember. So Billy Zane plays Cal, who is Rose's abusive fiance. And then Rose's mother is also sort of a villain in the sense that she is the one who is imposing upon Rose the sort of oppressive normative stereotypes of a woman in Victorian, I guess Edwardian England, right? In that sense, both Cal and her mother are viewed extremely poorly. I don't think either one is really given much love at all. It's actually implied that Rose becomes literally estranged from her mother after the Titanic, which is a kind of brutal thing to think about in a way. But that's a very sincere, like that's a deeply sort of sincere movie and story and kind of like way to tell things. What do you think the most cynical? What's like a great example of like a super cynical villain and like story?
So this is popping into my head because I watched it yesterday. Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Francis Ford Coppola movie, has like the most sympathetic portrayal of Dracula and the least sympathetic portrayal of Mina, I think, of any of the adaptations.
Why did you watch that? This is so fascinating to me. Why did you watch the Francis Ford Coppola Dracula?
It was on Netflix. It's spooky month, right? So
that's fair.
Spoilers for maybe a future a future episode, but it's spooky month. 2 days ago, we watched Elementary, The Devil and the Blacksmith, which I'm going to have Buddy watch because it is a Basque language movie that's based on like a Basque folktale about like I think the time around. I was reading about Carlism, which is not a thing I was familiar with, but that's besides the point. We watched Bram Stoker yesterday. It was like there's the Adam Driver movie on Netflix, which is like The Dead Don't Rest or something like that, which is on the list. But the other one was Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Keanu Dracula. And it was very campy, very, very, very fun. But like, you know, Dracula in most tellings is just kind of like this force of evil, like, you know, interested in himself and, you know, his own perpetuation. I mean, it's kind of like the innocent virginal character. In this telling, Dracula is tragic, right? He wins his battle. Like the Impaler stuff was not is portrayed as kind of like the normal kind of way that battle goes, right? Those devious Turks, like, you know, trick his wife into thinking that he's died, and she throws herself off a cliff, and he curses God because, you know, he has been betrayed by, you know, by God. And Mina falls in love with him, like outrightly says, like, I am in love with you. Willfully accepts a bite from Dracula. And honestly, I think it kind of like muddies the narrative a little bit, but it is. I also just rewatched the Red Letter Media review on this because it's like it is in many aspects very close to the book, right? Like, Mina's friend Lucy has 3 suitors: a Texan, a doctor, and a nobleman. They're all in the movie. But sorry, to get to the point, Dracula is very sympathetic, and his death is kind of portrayed as like a catharsis and like going to rest. And Mina is kind of unrepentantly cheating on her husband with the vampire. So, you know, that's the thing that popped into my head.
That's interesting. I was thinking maybe Game of Thrones would be the best version of this. I think of Game of Thrones as a deeply cynical story, but also one that relentlessly sympathizes, you know, kind of all of its most terrible or tries to create sympathy and understanding for all of its most terrible characters.
Jamie is a big example, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. I also, you know, I think Cersei, I think Tywin is a good example of this. I even think that there are, you know, like Mance Rayder and basically everybody except for the White Walkers themselves, even like the slavers from Slaver's Bay get all of this humanization through that the son of the, you know, she has to marry the son of the slaver in order to like pacify the nobles in Marine, or I guess is it Marine or is it Astapor? I can't remember, one of the places or whatever. Even they get sort of humanized as this is just our society. We have a slave society. These are our traditions, and they're, by our moral logic, they are good. Right. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. It's like it's an interesting thing to think about. What does it even say? What does it mean that cynical stories want to humanize villains and sincere ones don't? I don't know.
Yeah. And like I said, I don't think it's universal, because I do think you could have a sincere story with, you know, a sincere villain, but I just think it tends to correlate pretty strongly.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Anyway, in my mind, I wanted to create some level of like advice for like creating good or interesting sort of like villains for tabletop games, but I don't really know that we even got there. I don't even know what I would say.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we talked about some of the ways that you can like give a villain more color, right? Like dream sequences, journals, places where the players are not empowered to act, right? Like, the villain in the middle of a city, you can't just like stab a person in the middle of a city, right? Like, and also kind of like know your risks, right? Like this is the thing I think about is like, you've got the villain, you've got the big villain and he's like at the back of the pack of enemies and he runs away at a certain point. And, oh no, the party has caught him and, cuts him down. Like, do you fudge the dice to make him get away or do you let him cut him down? I don't know. I think by our lights, you cut him down and you just like take the story in a different direction, right? Like you figure out.
What's interesting? I had a version of this in 7th Expedition because 7th Expedition, I had 2 dungeons in the Eastern Forest. One of them is the Tomb of the Blood King. The other one is Taj Tekka. And Taj Tekka is a city and there's a Tomb King in the city. The Tomb King's name is Kunam. The Tomb of the Blood King had... So I kind of talked about this before, how there was somebody else had run the dungeon before that, and they were seeing notes from someone else who had gone through and sort of solved some of the puzzles in the dungeon, and they had left certain sort of clues. They understand that person was Kunam, the person who they had killed. But hypothetically speaking, they could have done it in the opposite order, right? If they had reached the Tomb of the Blood King first, they could have cleared the Tomb of the Blood King and then gone south and then found Taj Tekka and seen, oh my God, here is Kunam, the guy who we met and interacted with sort of by proxy of his notes and writing from this other sort of dungeon, which was intentional in the sense that, I don't know, I wrote it that way, but it is interesting that like that was a moment of sort of player choice. The players actually got to kind of sort of come to understand Kunam and humanize Kunam after they had already killed him, which is an interesting thing to do, right? He was no longer a threat. It's not like he was actually like a villain or anything like that, but because they learned more about the society of the Nakatl and where Kunam came from and what his motivations were and how he interacted with the Blood King, and he's the brother of Shurak who killed the Blood King and all this other kind of stuff. It sort of personified him in reverse, which is an interesting thing that I didn't really think about until this moment, I guess.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, no, but I guess, and you can work with it, right? Like that's kind of the lesson, right? Like is, don't sell your villain. Also, I think part of this is you don't know what's always what it's going to stick, right? Like what's going to be a thing that your players latch on to, right? Like I don't know if Chris anticipated Anti-Peggy being kind of like a central kind of like force in our game when it started, but it definitely became that, right? Or if he anticipated us misfingering, the one guy as the big bad when he turned out just to be like, a well-intentioned leader of an organization with some rogue elements in it.
I actually think Aunt Peggy is a great example. Part of what I like about Aunt Peggy as an example is I think it's actually very easy to do villains as side characters.
Auntie, just to speak. Auntie
Peggy. Yeah. I'm thinking about the kind of, in Mark's game in college, Endless Winter, there was a character named Oksana Fyodora, who was she was like a femme fatale character who just showed up in a bunch of places. Sometimes she gave us clues and worked with us and did some whatever because we were like temporarily aligned with her interests. And sometimes we fought her as a boss and, in a dungeon or whatever. We didn't end up killing her. I actually I think my character probably ended up marrying her or something like that. I don't know. She's like one in a long line of female femme fatales that I have seduced in D&D games, right? I actually think that's maybe one of the best ways to sort of deliver a villain in tabletop sort of stories is to create, to let the big bad be the unknowable god of whomever that you have to, okay, that's fine, right? But then create a sort of like the henchman dragon mini boss kind of character, a mercenary, someone who can show up in different places, someone who you don't necessarily need to kill, who is willing to cut and run, who is going to have shifting allegiances and, down the line. I think that's actually a pretty great villain archetype that we didn't necessarily address.
Yeah, it's just kind of like Barzillai was, right? Like,
yeah.
And he's so somebody that you could potentially work with. I think actually works pretty great. Everybody,
every villain is right next to sort of a redeemed, hero or something like that is a pretty good
or even somebody that's not redeemed, right? Like just like somebody that
that's true. Barzillai didn't really redeem himself. Yeah. He just realized that that the motivations of the party and his motivations were not at cross purposes and offered you a deal along those lines.
It was basically the same thing with Auntie Peggy, right? It's like she was going to take power for herself during the conversions, but she wasn't really interested in the wholesale destruction of the plane, and in fact was kind of against that. And so we had an ally of convenience in the moment. Yeah. So there's some advice for you. Some
advice for you. How was your week?
It was good.
So you're doing spooky month? Is that the end?
Well, I think so. Caroline has not been we do this thing where we alternate TV seasons. And she didn't like Evangelion, and then we watched the first season of Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I don't think she particularly likes Gurren Lagann, which is the series I think you're watching now. And so spooky season and Great British Bake Off are excuses for us to watch something together without me insisting it being Gurren Lagann. So I think that's kind of the play.
Does she not understand that the drill that pierces the heavens or something? I don't know. I've never seen Gurren Lagann before. Is it Gurren Lagann? I don't even know.
Yeah, that is the correct. You go to the drill that will pierce the heavens. Some of that is like some of these like the famous versions of lines are based on like earlier translations like. Don't like this. I think it originally got translated as something that's like, don't believe in yourself.
Believe in me who believes in you.
And it's more along the lines of like, if you can't believe in yourself, believe in the me that believes in you type of deal, which makes a little bit more sense, a little bit less Englishy. But yeah, and so, we will eventually get there. It's sometimes like playing, but while we're in spooky season, we're watching spooky movies. That's because they're fun. What else? I have done most of Silk Song at this point. I've got like 45 in-game hours. I hit. So, very mild spoilers. There is a one ending, and then there's a thing that if you do a bunch of steps, you get a truer ending, but then there's a Act 3 beyond the true ending. So I'm working on that now. What else? I've been just like mainlining Silk Song because I want to get it done. Like it is a good game, but like, oh man, I was telling you about some of this at Commander, but like, people were complaining for a long time about The Last Judge, which is kind of like one of the big bosses. He's kind of like the one. It's the boss that separates Act 1 from Act 2, effectively. And there's also ways around it. You don't actually have to fight her directly, I don't think. I think you might be able to skip it the entire time if you're willing to kind of like route around her. But that's besides the point. The people are saying that like the fight was brutal, the run back was bad. I finally get to this boss, and it's like the run back's not great, but I got it down, and the fight's tough, but it's not impossible, right? And so I fight it, and it takes me like a good like dozen to 2 dozen attempts to kill, but that's typical. That's like why I play these games, right? Because I want that level of challenge. It's like, all right, sure. Good. I beat it once, or I gave this away. I went with that, but I beat the boss and playing with death animation. And part of the death animation is it fights with like a battle sensor, a flaming battle sensor, and that sensor explodes, and kills me. Because I wasn't paying attention. I didn't think it would hurt me. And I have to beat the boss again. And I was like, fuck you, Team Cherry. And it actually, like, there are some bosses that are like waves of enemies that I think are too long. This one called the Forum Fight. And there's one boss that has an absurd run back over, and the run back is over water that will basically prevent you from healing. Like it'll eat one of your heals. And it's got a set of like 4 or 5 non-trivial waves and then an actual boss that is a bitch and a half to fight just because of the way the boss works. And so I was massively frustrated. And then I like saw on Reddit a way to choose to fight, and I just did that. And so it was
You know what's funny to me? I used to think I think I was much worse about this when I was younger. I think of those things not as bugs, but as features. I designed an ARG for the Rain World kids. You know about this? There are no Rain World kids who are listening, but I will talk about it a little bit because it is insightful. The ARG is called the Wind Chimes, and the Wind Chimes had a bot associated with this. So I built a Discord bot. I put the bot in the Rain World server, and the way that the Rain World, or the way that the bot worked was, you could type in a word, and then you would go on 6 hours of slow mode because I had the channel be slow mode, right? So you can only type in one word every 6 hours, and certain words were good and certain words were bad, and they needed to figure out what like the good words were, and there were a bunch of clues and all this other kind of stuff. And in the Rain World server, one of the admins pinged me and said, "Hey, did you know that people have found your bot because it is like on the developer backend of Discord, and they have added it to their own servers where they don't need to have the slow mode, and they are just brute forcing it." And I said, you know what? Good for them. You know, like, I didn't think about this. Well played. You got me, right? You are allowed to cheese the ARG. And the funny part is they didn't even win. The brute forcers lost to the people who were doing it in the Rain World server according to, you know, kind of like the rules that I had set up. But I think I have a lot more sort of tolerance for that these days, about this sort of feeling of like, you know, you got me. I think about this all the time. You got me, right?
Yeah, no, and you know, I didn't feel bad about that one in particular because it was like using a mechanic. It wasn't like particular. It wasn't like, you know, getting caught in a corner or something. It was just kind of like abusing the way that like some of the mechanics worked. And so, you know, I feel no shame about it. I also am like, so last night at Raid, Sarian told us, friend of the cast, Sarian told us that he has not moved on to Silk Song because he wants to 100% Hollow Knight first. And this is the only thing that I like, I won't say mad, but I am frustrated about. There is a boss who has like a shit zillion health, but like doesn't move very much. And the way you're supposed to beat it is with a, like there's a quest item that lets you kind of like suck blood out of things. And once you complete that quest, you don't have access to it anymore. And you can kill him the normal way. But I completed that quest and I can't suck the blood out of him anymore. And so the thing that's potentially going to stand between me and 100% completion is, do I sit there and chew through the shit zillion health on this boss, or do I just accept that I'm not going to finish the Hunter's Codex and leave it be? And the answer might be, I don't finish the Hunter's Codex and I leave it be. Because I don't know if I actually care that much. Like it is a good game, but I don't know if I'm like, as we are sitting right now, it is not my game of the year, and I don't see it being in it when we do the Derpies this year. I think
Silk Song is not your game of the year, and it won't be in the Derpies this year?
Well, it will probably be somewhere in the Derpies. It will not be in our traditional games as art, games as sport.
Okay. Yeah. That's like a deeply interesting answer to me, to be honest with you. Because, you know, I was reading a piece. Have you ever heard of poptimism? Do you know what poptimism is?
No.
For a long time, there was basically in like the 90s and 2000s, you sort of had this split among music critics that could be defined as rockism versus poptimism. Rockism sort of said that rock is real music, is kind of authentic and good, and pop is sort of this bubblegum, inauthentic bullshit, right? And Poptimism said that, you know, rock was the pop of 40 years ago, and now it has prestige, and pop will do the exact same thing, right? Pop music like Britney Spears, Backstreet Boys, all the rest of that kind of stuff is actually, you know, is actually sort of like good, and you should just roll over, sort of like old man. The piece was sort of making the argument that like the writer was on the wrong side of history because he was like a rock guy, right? He sort of defined this. Were you close enough to listen to New York City radio stations, like FM radio stations in Randolph?
Like Z100 was very popular.
Yeah, exactly. So what he said was, there was a marked, you had three different kind of groups of people. You had people who listened to Hot 97, which was the hip hop station. You had people who listened to Z100, who were the poptimists, and then you had the people who listened to K-Rock 92.3, which were the rock people. I listened to K-Rock. I loved, you know, I was a K-Rock kid. It's how I learned all these whatever, like classic rock and, you know, even I would say like metal songs, right? Because they would play stuff like from Master of Puppets or whatever else that would later go on to become like the most important music that I ever listened to. And he basically said the Poptimists have won because Taylor Swift put out an album and Rolling Stone gave it 100 out of 100, and they let Taylor Swift take over the entire website and all of the rest of it because a thing of a sort of trigger flipped, and he sort of hypothesizes this is internet stuff. I actually think it's deeper than that, but he hypothesizes basically that the world around us has sort of denigrated the nature of the critic as a tastemaker and has instead kind of created a version of things where the critic is a taste justifier. You know that you like Marvel movies, you go to the critic to tell you why, versus you know you like movies, you go to the critic to tell you which one to sort of go to. And I have a feeling about that with sort of Silksong, which is to say it's sort of too big to kind of fail. It got this insane level of sort of hype and fandom and all of the rest of it, and I don't know, and I just have complicated feelings about the nature of critique that I've seen sort of around it, because it is carrying so much. I mean, we talked about this like 2 weeks ago or whatever. It's just carrying so much cultural weight and context that I don't think anybody can really authentically kind of review the product itself, because definitionally such a huge portion of your review is going to be colored by the nature of it being the 7 years long follow-up that is so insanely highly anticipated to indie game darling from 2018 Hollow Knight. Do you know what I mean?
I do. I don't know how much I buy that though, because like Duke Nukem Forever was terrible, right? And that was the original kind of like caught in development hell game, right?
But I think everybody kind of people hated Duke Nukem Forever. I don't think Duke Nukem Forever had the level of prestige that Hollow Knight did. Do you know what I mean? Or like Duke Nukem, whatever was before Forever, 64 or something. Yeah, no,
I think cultural tastes changed, and obviously the project changed hands a bunch of times. I don't know. It'll be interesting. I think a good test for this will be Marathon, if it ever comes out.
True.
Because it's got a lot of... Actually, no, maybe there's a lot of weird cultural baggage, right? Like with different properties, like Hogwarts Legacy is the other one that pops into my mind, right? You know, the one that was kind of like had a bunch of kind of like the influencers mad, because of J.K. Rowling's political stances, but still sold a shit zillion copies, and as far as I can tell, was a good game. And so managed to avoid like, and this is slightly different because this is stuff that's external to the game. It's not like, you know, it's a follow up to like, you know, a well-beloved, Harry Potter game or whatever. I don't know.
I've been thinking a lot about this question. If I could think of the 10 games that like, I've been thinking about Skyrim recently, really is what it comes down to. And I have made the case on the podcast a million times that I think Skyrim was like a truly transcendent, like 100 out of 100. I mean, not even like perfect game. It's just that it's so good that it transcends our mere ability to understand it, right? And that there are a handful of games in my mind that are this good, and just kind of become so huge and important that it doesn't even fucking matter, and what any of the rest of it sort of whatever it sort of means. And I sort of wonder if Hollow Knight Silksong like will end up in this kind of category.
I think Hollow Knight will. I don't know that Silksong will. And I don't think it says anything. This is like the, when a thing raises the bar by this much and its sequel raises it from here to here, like this is the one that gets remembered, right? Like, and that's it. Silksong could be just kind of like an extended DLC for Hollow Knight in the sense that it is more of the same, but tougher, and by consequence, super unapproachable for people who aren't super into Hollow Knight. Which is maybe different than like say Elden Ring, which is what I would say like is the game that kind of like broke free of the FromSoft kind of like this is for like a particular type of person. Elden Ring became kind of like the version of Dark Souls for normies. And so like I don't want Silksong is a very good game. But I also think there is a world where if it was bad, that people would just think it was bad, right? Like, it has elements to it that are frustrating and will, be in discussions about like, is Silksong better than Hollow Knight? Is Silksong one of the great games or whatever? I think that's a thing that will have active discussion, but I don't think if the game was truly horrible, it would keep it from being, I don't think it would have kept it from being named as horrible, right? Like,
yeah,
like Kerbal Space Program 2, right? Like,
yeah, that's a great example of one. I don't know. This is complicated. I really don't know how I feel. There's a part of me that wants to say it's sort of like threshold based, but there are things that I just think, I don't know. There are things that I think kind of lose their... I don't even know. Like, part of me wants to say there are times where I feel like the sort of culture around a game and its backlash and all of the rest of it will matter more than the game itself. Like, I don't think Hearthstone is actually a pretty good example right now. There's sort of a backlash happening in Hearthstone. It's a pretty minor one, all things considered, but it is real. But I think that the backlash is actually not a representation of the game design at the moment. It's sort of a representation of a number of other sort of things that are happening related to Hearthstone that are bad. But the game design's crime is kind of overblown by essentially sort of the community. And really what's happening is this context stuff or whatever. Another good example of this might honestly be I'm a pig and I eat slop. Did you follow that conversation? The Magic the Gathering EDH stuff? Yeah. For the folks at home, a prominent Magic the Gathering professional basically wrote a screed where he likened Magic the Gathering as a restaurant, and the restaurant starts selling slop, and he's still eating this beautiful, well-made food, but now there is slop on the menu, and he doesn't understand why there's slop on the menu. The slop is a metaphor for commander cards, and he talks about the people who eat the slop as pigs, and he kind of has this line where he says, some people will just tell me I am a pig and I eat slop, which is how I feel. But I think that's a similar, like a similar sort of, I don't know, piece of the conversation, right? The nature of how the context of Commander and
it was very funny to me that like people had different like that. Like I assumed it was about Universes Beyond. Honestly,
I also assumed it was about Universes Beyond at first. Yeah, I hate Universes Beyond so much. Are you excited for fucking Star Trek? What is it? It's a couple of them. It's Star Trek is one. There's a second Marvel set that I am not excited for.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't. So, I actually have more tolerance for the secret layers. Than, and also the ones that are like vaguely, relevant, right? Like Star Trek. Star Trek is like one, like Star Trek to me is better than Spider-Man. It's like one step outside of what I would say is okay, right? Like,
honestly, the thing about Star Trek that I find most depressing is that the reason that they did Edge of Eternities and that they did of Eternities in the way that they did, I think, is to set the precedent for Star Trek.
To do the space stations.
I'm sort of depressed by that. Just really depresses me. The idea that, and I can't prove this. This is the part that it's almost conspiratorial, but it's the idea that they're only doing this thing, which is actually cool and beloved and people really like Edge of Eternities and stuff. The only reason that they did that is so that they could justify the Star Trek set. I just deflates me like a balloon.
Well,
yeah, whatever. We'll see. Ironically, the exact same thing happened in Hearthstone, but it happened in a way that I found perfectly permissible, which is to say that there was a set, and the set, there was a set that set up, there was literally a space set. It was literally a space set to set up a Universes Beyond style crossover, but the Universes Beyond style crossover was with StarCraft, which is also a Blizzard property that I love deeply, and the mechanics were pretty great. And so that was amazing, and I'm happy about it. And maybe I should just be be a pig and eat slop. I don't know.
part of it, I think part of the problem is that like Hearthstone was always a secondary product, right?
Yeah.
Hearthstone having even if it had like a full Universes Beyond, crossover with like, Star Wars or Warhammer 40K, right? Like, or Warhammer Fantasy, right? That wouldn't take away from World of Warcraft advancing the Warcraft storyline, right? The only, Magic the Gathering universe stuff you get is in Magic the Gathering universes within stuff. And even the universes within stuff isn't really advancing the plot anymore, and is doing like fucking racetracks and spaceships and cowboy hats, right? Like,
yep.
So I think that's a big. If Magic the Gathering had like a very popular MMO that like dealt with like the lore on Dominaria or something, I think people would be a lot less frustrated about it because they could always go to World of Dominaria craft to get their Vorthos fix, as it were.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Did you enjoy our Commander games on Monday? Were those some good games?
Yeah, no, they were fun. I got to try out a couple of my decks. They mostly did what I wanted them to do.
I liked your Lock deck. I felt bad that game ended so early, but I thought that deck is cool. I think that deck with my Bumbleflower deck will be truly fucking awesome because it'll give everybody a ton of mana and a ton of cards, and they can just go fucking wild.
Yeah, and you're incentivized to spend it down too, or to spend it too, because otherwise you're like eating damage, right? Like that's I think the key part of it. I do think that like part of the issue with the Yurlock deck is Yurlock needs to be out. Otherwise, like, all the main acceleration stuff doesn't really like do anything.
There is a concept in more competitive EDH circles that I have been aware of for a long time, which is the idea of toolbox commander. Have you ever heard of this phrase, like toolbox commanders? The idea is you build good stuff is actually the better version of this. Have you heard the term good stuff before?
No. I have not.
So good stuff is sort of the theory that instead of making commander decks that are all about having a synergistic commander who does the thing, right? You build your deck kind of around the commander. You just put good stuff in the deck and you get a pretty good commander who sometimes does neat things for you, but really the deck is built to do kind of whatever. And then you bring out the commander when you have nothing kind of better to do. I actually think that this is pretty true. In my mind, Most commander decks would probably be better if they were less centered around the commander. And almost always at our bracket, I think it is correct to remove people's commanders kind of instantaneously. It's common for me to have the thought in my brain, I have 1 open white mana and I have a Swords to Plowshares. I should just swords the commander now. I know it's a problem. I know it's going to be a problem. And I sort of stop myself from doing that because I think it's kind of like unfun or uninteresting sort of gameplay, but it's definitely not sort of optimized gameplay. And I definitely have felt that. The big weakness of the Takesha deck is very similar, right? That deck is really only good when you have Takesha out for multiple turns and you can just go digging. And the only reason that deck is sort of like has won, in my opinion, is because people people just see a bunch of little 1/1s that aren't really attacking and they're like, what are you doing? You're surveilling? Okay, who cares, right? And they're getting on with their sort of lives, right? I think that I just kind of think that it should be killing everybody's commanders all the time, basically. It's like the proper way to play the game if I'm thinking about it in those terms.
I think that most of it is that we don't run a ton of removal in our decks, probably for normative reasons. Also, like spot removal. This is kind of like, the distraction maker's point about like single spot removal is like bad for the person you use it against, but it's also bad for you because you're spending a card, whereas the other 2 players are, presumably a card up on you, and so not the greatest time in the world. But
listen, I felt like those games were great. I really liked you playing Yuriko, honestly. That Yuriko game at the very end, I think, was a lot of fun. I think Yuriko is secretly... It's funny because I think Yuriko is sort of a boogeyman in our play group, but she makes for extremely good games because of the pressure of life totals. Yeah. I kind of think the worst games that we get into are the really long, drawn-out ones where nobody really is approaching a victory condition, but everyone are taking 7-minute turns, and it's just like a brutal sort of slog. Yuriko gets people into the double-digit, like single-digit HP totals, and it's just like, I'm gonna fucking kill you if you are not proactive right now, and it just makes for really great explosive sort of matches.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the problem with the more dirtly decks is that they have to dirtle to win, right? Like, I think you and Josh are most guilty of dirtling. And I think I am secondarily guilty of just like doing stuff that will just like Ian Malcolm is a meme deck, but it is just a chaos deck, right? Like it will just make the board state like unplayable for dumb reasons, and I love it for that. But it is also like I don't want to play that more than like once a day. I don't think, because otherwise, Possibility Storm is fun once in a while. It is not like if every game you had to like fucking run your stuff through a Possibility Storm filter, you would fucking strangle me before.
I love the way that you were like, okay, I am going to tap 7 mana and attempt to cast Thieves Auction. Does anyone have it? It's like you were begging me, because I think I counterspelled it. Yeah, it's like you were begging somebody to counterspell that game. Like you do not actually want to resolve the Thieves Auction, but just like,
it is. It would have been fun to resolve the Thieves Auction, but it also something that I think I picked this up from Salubrious Snail, who is in the kind of like, let's say, less prominent commander advice pod of him, Trinket Mage, and there's a third one that they all have a podcast together, which is like when you are playing a game at like a non-CEDH level, it is good and useful for you to signal to the table things like, this is a thing you should pay attention to, by saying, I attempt to resolve, right? Like, yeah. I'm not pulling any fast ones, right? Like, it's like, this is going to be a thing. If you want to do something about it, this is the thing to pay attention to, right? Like,
yeah, it's funny because I do love the turnabout. You had one with Perplexing Chimera. What was that? Where you were just like, oh, that sounds like a good spell. I think I'll take it, right? Yeah. Or like you gave me the Perplexing Chimera and I was like, you really should cast a spell on the top of my deck. And it was the take a texture turn so that I could Perplexing Chimera just solely so that I could, it's like the most vindictive play I've ever made, just so that I could kill fucking Josh, right? Like, I think that's the stuff that makes for really good EDH games. I think part of that was...
What was the other thing? Like Josh, like because I pulled that with the Rod of Chaos, because otherwise it would have killed you.
Yeah.
I swung the ninja at Josh, and he went to do something to the ninja, and I used the Perplexing Chimera to steal that removal and like throw it somewhere else. And then he used the Perplexing Chimera to block the ninja and just like moved the whole direction. It's just like, those are like, Perplexing Chimera is a great, like, honestly, Perplexing Chimera
is a fantastic card. It is the kind of card, honestly, that if I was a different man, I would put it in every single blue deck I have, just for the like incredible politics of having a Perplexing Chimera on the board, where just anybody at any time can just like steal a shit.
Yeah, and the fun thing about it too is, is that like it's your hand, you are firing the gun, but then handing a loaded gun to the person that you just fucked, right? Like that, that's the best part of it, right? Like, yeah. In the chat, Delph says, "Me crying anytime I have to, Dirtle." That's I appreciate Rachel's decks just because they are like straightforward, green stompy type decks typically, right? Or like red stompy, right? Like do some aggression, and it's like it's a proper fight with people lining up in battle lines, right? Like,
what was the thing that Sarian called this something? He said it was not on. Oh, it's skullduggery. He accused us of skullduggery, winning by skullduggery, which is true. I think I do like winning by skullduggery. I like winning by approach of the second sun into approach of the second sun, right? Guess what? There's a boy here, and surprise, he's big.
No, that's fucking that's AC, Tyrant of the Gyre Strait, right? Like big boys, lots of mana, let's kill stuff, right? Like, I should run AC. I upgraded AC. I threw in a couple extra cards. I also, I filed all my cards away. And I discovered I had the Wonder equivalent, but for trample, I forget what its name is.
Brawn,
Brawn. I have Brawn. I have a couple of other like big trample cards, which are like, because my biggest problem with closing out with AC is that like I didn't have a trample in the deck, so it'd just be like, I swing 4 32 72s at you. And it's like I block with a 1/1, right? Like and so I have added some kind of like either evasion or trample effects or stuff like that, or a couple of alternate win cons, right? Like I think it's like heal it. Like there's a thing that's like put 100 counters
Helix
on
Pinnacle.
Yeah.
I considered putting that deck in something that I can't remember what it was. It's actually not a deck that I have built yet. I have a big mana deck that I've been thinking about putting together that is Druid Tribal, because Druid is just a really fucking weird typal to build a deck around in Magic, because most Druids are like mana dorks, and so you just end up making a big mana deck. And I was like, Helix Pinnacle would be pretty fucking good in this deck because you are generating obscene amounts of mana, and being able to just dump all of that into Helix Pinnacle seems good.
I have a Helix Pinnacle in Urlock as well, just because, like, well, if I have mana at the end of the turn that I don't want to burn myself with, I will just dump it into the Helix Pinnacle, right? Like,
that's I think that's Listen, I think that's valid.
Yeah.
Okay, well, should we wrap it up? Should we get out of here?
Yeah, let's get out of here. All right, if you'd like to email us about any of the stuff that we've talked about on this podcast, email us at gmail.com or podcast@subdersplaygames.com. You can rate and review us anywhere you find podcasts. You can watch us live on youtube.com/subdersplaygames or twitch.tv/subdersplaygames. That's everything I have. Buddy, do you have anything you're looking to promote?
I guess I don't have anything that I'm looking to promote. Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.